Arrogant sergeant laughs at veteran's daughter's outfit. Then she hits a target no one else could. The sharp, mocking laugh of Sergeant Donovan cut through the shooting range as he scoffed at 12-year-old Riley Kessler's camouflage outfit, calling it nothing but a kid playing dress-up with gear she'll never handle. What Donovan didn't see was the quiet fire burning beneath Riley's calm exterior. The legacy of a father who had been a silent warrior in elite forces and a daughter determined to prove strength doesn't shout. As Riley steadied her aim on a target no one else could hit, the sergeant's arrogance would shatter in stunned silence. Behind her unassuming jacket lay a story of sacrifice, resilience, and unyielding dignity. A story that would restore honor not just to Riley, but to the countless veterans whose battles go unseen. This is a journey of quiet strength, unexpected victories, and respect finally earned where it was long overdue. And before I forget, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump in. The morning air at Fort Braymore carried the scent of dust, gun oil, and something older. History, maybe. The firing range hadn't changed much in 20 years. The targets were digital now, the concrete more cracked, but the silence before a shot still hung heavy. Mara Kessler stood at the edge of the observation deck, her arms crossed, her eyes shielded beneath a ball cap too faded to show the emblem that once meant everything. The worn SEAL team patch barely clung to the side. Her posture was loose, relaxed, but her gaze never left the field. Beside her stood her daughter, Riley. 16. Slim frame. Combat boots slightly too big. Baggy woodland camo pants tucked into them. A windbreaker draped over her shoulders. And over it, an old Navy-issued combat jacket. Heavy, sun-bleached, and far too large. The name stitched over the chest. Kessler. The jacket had belonged to her father. Riley wore it proudly. They didn't expect to stay long. Riley wasn't military. Not yet. She was just visiting during a civilian youth marksmanship day at the base, something offered to local families. She hadn't even planned to fire. But when her mother gently nodded toward the line, she walked down quietly. Mara stayed behind. A few feet away, Sergeant Clay Donovan watched with a smirk curling at one corner of his mouth. Mid-30s. Loud. Confident in the way men sometimes are when they've never had to be quiet. His uniform was crisp, his boots mirrored. But his ego arrived before he did. "Hey, kid," he called out, loud enough for the other teens and instructors to hear. "Halloween's over. You sure that jacket's not wearing you?" Laughter rippled down the line. Riley didn't flinch. She kept walking. Sergeant Donovan chuckled to himself, then looked over to Mara. "Is that your daughter?" "No offense, ma'am, but she looks like she raided a surplus bin and lost a bet." Mara said nothing. She didn't even look at him. Donovan chuckled again, louder this time. "Well, hell, maybe she's got her daddy's sense of humor, huh?" Silence. Then Mara finally turned. Just a little, enough for Donovan to see her eyes. Calm, steady, familiar, in a way he couldn't place. "She has his jacket," she said quietly. "That's enough." There was no insult in her voice. No anger. Just finality. A kind of full stop to a sentence Donovan didn't realize he was in. He shifted his stance, uncomfortable, and turned back toward the field. "All right, let's see what she can do then." Out on the line, Riley adjusted the sling. No showy movements. No flair. Just calm hands, practiced fingers. She dropped into prone like she'd done it 100 times. Because she had. But no one knew that yet. Not even Sergeant Donovan. Not yet. Riley settled into the gravel with the ease of someone who understood the ground wasn't her enemy, just a part of the process. Her elbows dug in, spine aligned. The rifle rested naturally in her hands, not clutched, not gripped tight, held like an extension of thought. She didn't check if anyone was watching. She already knew they were. The wind whispered low across the range. Dry? A gentle push from left to right. Riley tilted her head slightly and took one breath in, long and measured. Then she let it out. Her finger touched the trigger, but didn't squeeze. Not yet. Behind her, Sergeant Donovan chuckled again. "Bet she doesn't even know how to work the scope." Mara didn't reply. She didn't move, but her fingers gently brushed the fabric of the sleeve around her wrist. The jacket Riley wore. It had been folded on a hospital chair for weeks once, waiting for its owner to come back from a coma. He never did. Riley had never known her father, not in the way people talk about knowing someone, but she'd learned the weight of his absence through stories, medals, and the silent things that shaped her mother's life. She'd asked about him once, years ago, after finding the jacket in the attic. Mara hadn't said much. Just, he was steady. And when he pulled the trigger, it meant something. And that had been enough. On the range, the instructor began the sequence. One shot, open target. Adjust for wind manually. 200-yard mark. Others took their shots. Most hit the outer ring. Some missed entirely. Donovan, arms crossed, leaned against the rail like he was watching a high school game. When Riley's turn came, she didn't ask a question. She didn't need to. She adjusted the elevation 2 clicks, windage 1. Then her breath slowed. In, hold, out, then silence. The rifle cracked. A clean, sharp break against the quiet. At the 200-yard mark, the target flickered. Dead center. The instructor blinked. Confirmed. Bullseye. Donovan tilted his head. Huh. Beginner's luck. Riley was already preparing for the next round. No reaction. No smile. Her hand moved with steady confidence, adjusting again for a farther distance. Mara watched her daughter, but her mind was slipping sideways, back in time, to another range. Another shot. One that had saved 3 pinned-down SEALs from a rooftop in Fallujah. The man behind that shot had the same eyes Riley had now. Focused. Quiet. Intentional. The next shot rang out. 400-yard target. Hit. Then again. 600-yard target. Another hit. The instructor was now fully upright. No longer casual. No longer guiding. Just watching. So was everyone else. Except Donovan. He still wore a smirk, but it had started to crack. What's the farthest target you got out there? Mara asked him calmly. He shrugged. 1,200 yards. But no one hits that. It's just ceremonial. Mara nodded. Let her try. Donovan laughed. She'll never touch it. Mara looked back at Riley. She doesn't need to touch it. She paused, voice low. She just needs to remind it that someone can. The air thickened around the range like weather had changed, but it hadn't. The sky remained bright and cloudless, yet the mood had shifted. Even the gravel seemed quieter, the kind of silence that creeps in before something important. At the 1,200-yard marker, the target barely looked like more than a shimmer. Ceremonial. That's what Donovan called it. A trophy for the impossible. Riley adjusted her scope. The world around her narrowed. She wasn't thinking about the sergeant, or the kids behind her, or even the instructor now standing still as stone. Her focus was a single white dot in the far distance. She'd practiced this. Not here. Not officially. Not under anyone's instruction. But on private land, a quiet field behind their house, where her mother had set up makeshift targets and taught her the difference between shooting and aiming. Shooting was easy. Aiming required presence. Mara had always said, when you see the target clearly, it's not about the bullet. It's about stillness. You're not firing at the target. You're letting it come to you. Riley inhaled again. One clean breath. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Behind her, Donovan muttered, "No way she hits this." He folded his arms again, but this time slower. More cautious. He glanced sideways at Mara, but she wasn't watching him. She was watching Riley. There was a whisper of movement. The rifle's recoil barely nudged her shoulder. And the target, 1,200 yards out, flickered. Then a faint metallic clang echoed back through the valley like a delayed memory. Confirmed. Hit. Silence followed. The kind that wraps around people when they've just seen something they don't quite understand. Even the wind held its breath. Riley sat up, slowly, calmly. She pulled the bolt back with a practiced motion, cleared the chamber, and rested the rifle beside her. No celebration. No words. Just a breath and a glance back at her mother. Mara gave the smallest nod. Donovan blinked. What the hell? He stepped forward, then stopped halfway. The instructor walked past him, shaking his head in disbelief. 1,200 yards. We've had Army Rangers miss that one. Donovan looked at Mara, as if she might explain something that still didn't compute. Who trained her? Mara finally turned. Her father. His eyes narrowed. Yeah? And who was he? Mara stepped forward quietly. She pulled back the sleeve of her own jacket just enough to reveal a thin, weathered tattoo above her wrist. A symbol only a few recognized. Fewer earned. Seal trident. Donovan's smirk was long gone. Lieutenant Commander Jake Kessler, Mara said softly. Devgru. Blue Squadron. Sniper cell. 8 tours. A beat of silence. He made that shot. Once. 23 years ago. Then, just above a whisper. And now so has his daughter. The wind returned first. Just a light breeze, as if nature itself exhaled. Sergeant Donovan stood still, words forming and failing before reaching his lips. His confidence hadn't just been cracked, it had been quietly and precisely dismantled, one shot at a time. And now, with that single name, Kessler, the entire day had shifted. Behind them, the other teens stared in stunned silence. One kid whispered, "Who is she?" The instructor didn't answer. He was too busy looking at Mara. She rolled the sleeve of her jacket back down, the tattoo gone again beneath the fabric. Not hidden, just protected. Devgru? Donovan asked, this time with less sarcasm and more caution. Blue Squadron. Mara nodded once. That's right. And you? I was never the shooter, she said softly. I was the one who patched them up. And sometimes, the one who got them out. There was weight in those words. They didn't brag. They explained. Donovan's eyes dropped for a moment, unsure where to land. Riley stood beside her now, rifle slung across her chest, the oversized jacket making her look small, until you looked at her eyes. Then she didn't look small at all. You said this was just a youth event, Donovan muttered, still trying to regain control of the moment. It is, Mara replied. You just didn't ask what kind of youth she was. Riley looked up at her mom. Are we done? Mara nodded. Yeah, kid. We're done here. They turned to leave, but just as they reached the edge of the range, the instructor stepped forward. Wait, he said. That shot, the 1200-yard, that's going to be on the baseboard. Nobody's done that here in over a decade. Riley paused, thoughtful. Could you not put my name on it? The instructor blinked. Why? Riley gave a small shrug. He didn't get to put his name on most of his either. Mara watched her daughter, so young, but already understanding something most people never do. That honor doesn't always wear a nameplate. That silence can be stronger than applause. The instructor nodded. We'll log it. But anonymous. Riley smiled. Thank you. Donovan watched all of it unfold. The quiet strength, the layered history, the respect exchanged without noise or medals. And something in him shifted. Not out of guilt. Not quite regret either. But recognition. As they walked away, he called out, quieter this time. She's got your steadiness. Mara didn't turn back. She just said, she carries what's his. That answer lingered. Long after the echoes of the shots had faded, they walked back to the lot in silence. Not the kind that weighed them down, but the kind that wrapped around them like understanding. Mara's boots crunched softly in the gravel. Riley's steps, lighter, matched the rhythm beside her. The bass behind them hummed with movement. Distant shouting from a drill instructor echoed across the parade grounds, and the faint clatter of gear filtered through the breeze. But none of it touched them. Mara glanced over. You all right? Riley nodded. Yeah. You didn't flinch back there. Not once. I was just doing what you taught me. Mara smiled faintly. No. You did more than that. They reached Mara's old truck, a dusty, olive-drab Ford with a cracked windshield and a faded bumper sticker that read, Don't mistake silence for weakness. Riley tossed her bag into the bed and leaned against the door. Her face was calm, but Mara could see the thoughts working behind her eyes. You mad at him? Mara asked. Riley shook her head. No. I think he just didn't know. Didn't know what? What the jacket meant. That gave Mara pause. The jacket had sat in a cedar chest for nearly a decade. She had folded it the day after the funeral, right after the flag had been handed to her with solemn hands and emotionless eyes. It still smelled faintly of smoke, of oil, and some desert wind from a place that never had a name on the maps. Riley had found it when she was 11. Put it on in secret. It had almost touched the ground on her back then. You remember when I found it? Riley asked, reading her mother's silence. I thought if I wore it, I'd feel him. I didn't. Not right away. But, she tapped her chest lightly. But over time, I started to. Like, little pieces of him were in the way it fits. Mara nodded. It fits different now. Yeah. Riley smiled faintly. But it still smells like him. Mara's throat tightened at that. They sat in the truck for a long moment before Mara turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. She shifted into drive, but didn't move just yet. Do you want to go back tomorrow? She asked. To the range. Or somewhere quieter. Somewhere it's just us. Like the valley. The valley, that quiet stretch of land behind the ridge where Jake used to go when he needed silence. Where Mara took Riley shooting for the first time. No targets painted. Just cans, bottles, and memories. Riley nodded slowly. I'd like that. Mara pulled onto the base road, the tires crunching gravel. As the gate came into view, a different kind of silence filled the cab. Not the silence of grief or hesitation, but one that came when people knew exactly who they were and where they came from. And on Riley's back, the jacket rested gently, too large still, in all the right ways. The road to the valley wasn't paved. It never had been. It twisted through tall grass and dips in the earth like it was following an old memory, not a map. The truck bounced along in silence, the sun casting long shadows across the open fields. It was early evening now, golden hour, and everything seemed softer, quieter. Riley rolled down the window. The wind carried the scent of dry cedar, warm earth, and gunpowder ghosts. They hadn't come here in almost 2 years. Mara parked just shy of the treeline. There was a clearing ahead. Not large, just enough room for a folding table, a few sandbags, and a long line of makeshift wooden markers at various distances. Jake had trained there, taught Mara there. She had taught Riley there. And now, time seemed to fold inward. Riley stepped out slowly, the rifle case in hand. She was quiet, but not withdrawn. Focused. Grounded. The weight of the jacket across her shoulders looked lighter now, like it belonged. Set it up? Mara asked gently. Riley nodded and opened the tailgate. Together, they pulled out the bench and laid the case across it. No rush. No audience. No instructor calling out distances. Just the two of them. The way it had always been. The wind in the valley was tricky. It came through gaps in the trees, shifting and circling like it had its own agenda. Jake used to call it the whisper. If you listened long enough, it told you everything you needed to know. Riley lay down and prone, resting against the familiar old shooting mat. Mara stayed behind, leaning against the truck bed with arms crossed, watching her daughter through narrowed eyes. Not critical, just observant. Jake had stood in the same spot, years ago, watching Mara hit her first 600-yard target. Pick one, Mara said quietly. No rules. Riley scanned the markers, bottles, cans, rusted license plates hung by string. At 800 yards, there was a bent piece of sheet metal nailed to a fence post, faded numbers half sprayed on it. 47. I want that one, Riley said. Mara smiled. That's a good one. Your dad used to miss that one on purpose, so I'd feel better. Riley turned, confused. He missed on purpose? Only when it didn't matter. He believed the people around him needed to win, sometimes more than he needed to prove he could. Riley nodded, then focused through the scope. Mara looked up toward the sky. The sun had dipped low, casting golden lines across the treetops. Her breath caught slightly, just for a moment, because in that light, her daughter looked like him. Same quiet stillness. Same fire behind calm eyes. And then, crack. The metal plate rang out through the valley. Clean. Loud. Final. No one saw it. No one filmed it. But it was real. And in the places that mattered, it would echo for years. The sound of the hit still lingered in the warm air, a metallic ring slowly swallowed by the wind. Riley lowered the rifle and let her arms relax. Her breath steadied, but her heartbeat wasn't racing. It had never even spiked. She had expected more emotion. A rush. A grin. Something. Instead, she just felt peace. Mara walked over, the gravel crunching softly under her boots. She crouched beside her daughter, eyes on the distant target. Was that your first time hitting 800? Riley shook her head. I hit it last year once. But it was windy, and I clipped the side. Mara gave a small nod of respect. Today was clean. Center. I adjusted for the low-pressure pocket above the tree line. Mara's lips quirked upward. You're watching the clouds now. I remembered what you said. If the grass moves left but the trees don't, there's a gap in pressure. Jake had said it first. Mara had passed it down. Now Riley held it like her own. They packed up slowly, taking their time. There was no schedule out here. No timeline. No sergeant barking orders. No clipboard checkboxes. Just two women who had once been three. And a jacket that somehow still carried all three of them. As Riley zipped up the rifle case, she glanced at her mom. Do you think Dad would be proud? Mara didn't answer right away. She picked up one of the spent casings from the gravel. Brass. Warm, clean. She rolled it between her fingers. Your father had a rule, she said finally. He never answered that question for anyone. Not even for himself. Riley blinked. Why not? Because pride can be cheap if you don't earn it every day. He didn't believe in measuring your worth by a single shot or one good day. He believed in consistency. In presence. She placed the spent casing into Riley's palm. You're consistent. And you showed up. Riley held the casing tightly, feeling the faint warmth still inside it. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. They sat together on the truck's tailgate as the sun dipped behind the ridge, the world stained in gold and long shadows. Birds moved low across the field, and the crickets began their slow climb into evening. Mara looked toward the fence line. He used to come out here after long deployments. Wouldn't talk. Just sit in the dirt, sometimes for hours. I know, Riley said softly. I found his journal. Mara turned. What? Riley hesitated. In the attic. Last year. I didn't mean to go through his things. But it wasn't really locked. It was waiting, I think. Mara didn't speak. Her face was unreadable, but her hands tensed slightly in her lap. I only read a few pages, Riley continued. But he wrote about you. About the time you got hurt. And how scared he was to lose you. Mara's eyes flickered. He didn't show it. He didn't have to, Riley said. He put it in the pages. The valley was silent for a long time. And then Mara nodded once. Maybe it's time I read it too. Back home, the attic was still warm from the late summer sun. It always held a dry, nostalgic heat, not stifling, just close. Dust hovered in the air like suspended time, and the wooden beams creaked with even the softest steps. Mara hadn't been up here in years. She hesitated at the top of the stairs. Riley moved past her gently, like the space was already hers. She stepped around boxes, ducked under a beam, and crouched beside a worn olive footlocker tucked behind an old trunk of Christmas lights and retired uniforms. He kept it under his SEAL gear, Riley said softly. I didn't open anything else. Just the journal. Mara knelt beside her and looked at the locker like it might breathe. The combination still came to her fingers. 4-7-1-0. The month and year Jake was deployed to Ramadi. The same deployment that changed the way he looked at doorways and fireworks forever. She popped the latch. Inside was the jacket Riley now wore, carefully folded, the same as the day Mara placed it there. Beside it were Jake's boots, worn soft in the soles, the laces frayed where desert grit had eaten them alive. A handful of coins, one with a bullet groove in it. His old K-bar. And under it all, a small leather-bound notebook. Mara picked it up with both hands, as if it might crumble if she wasn't careful. The edges were curled. The leather was cracked. But it was intact. She opened it. The first page was blank. The second was dated in Jake's rough handwriting. August 3rd, 0215. The ink was dark, sharp, decisive, like his voice used to be when he briefed a team. Mara read aloud, softly. Mara took shrapnel today. Didn't cry. Didn't even grunt. She just looked at me like I was overreacting. I wasn't. She almost bled out before I could drag her behind the wall. I keep hearing the sound her body made when she hit the ground. I keep seeing the blood pool out under her. And I know she's going to walk it off, because that's what she does. But I had a moment today. A real one. If she hadn't opened her eyes again, I don't know what I'd have done. Mara's breath caught. She hadn't known he wrote any of this. Jake never shared fear. He wore steadiness like armor. Until the day he didn't come home. She flipped the page. There were other entries. Long ones. Quiet ones. Some were about Riley. dreams he had for her, fears he never voiced aloud. There were drawings, too. A small sketch of the valley. One of Riley, as a toddler, asleep against his chest in the old recliner. Mara pressed her hand to the page. It was like touching his voice. Behind her, Riley sat cross-legged, watching carefully. Not intruding, just present. He wrote about you every month, Riley said. Even when he couldn't call. Even when they were off the grid. Mara nodded slowly, still reading. He never gave himself credit for the way he loved. I think he let the pages hold it. Mara looked up, eyes glistening. And now we get to hold him back. The journal stayed on the kitchen table that night. Mara didn't try to put it away. She didn't close it or fold the cover like something to be preserved. It remained open, spine curved gently, as if Jake had just stepped outside and might return any moment to write another line. Riley sat at the counter, sipping from a chipped ceramic mug that still had the Naval Special Warfare logo half faded on the side. It had been Jake's. She claimed it quietly one year on her birthday. Mara never contested it. Across from her, Mara turned another page. Riley's first birthday. I wasn't there. Got a grainy photo sent through an encrypted tablet, and I must have stared at it for an hour. She's got Mara's eyes, but I think she'll move like me. Stillness isn't something you teach. It's something you pass down in the marrow. God help any man who underestimates her. Mara smiled at that. A soft, tired smile. You know, she said, her voice low but rich. When your father was first recruited into SEAL Team 6, he refused to wear his trident in public. Riley raised an eyebrow. Why? He thought it invited the wrong kind of attention. Said that if someone needed to know who he was, they already would. Riley nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. So when people didn't believe him, he let them. He believed more in silence than correction. They sat like that for a while. No TV, no phones. Just the soft ticking of the old kitchen clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the cicadas sang into the night, a song older than grief, older than war. Riley reached for the journal and flipped to a later entry, one marked only with a single date, October 11th. She read aloud this time. Tried calling today. No signal. Maybe that's a gift. Some things I'm not ready to say out loud. Riley walked for the first time this week, Mara says. She did it barefoot on the porch. Said she walked toward the wind like it was calling her. If I don't make it home, if something ever goes wrong, I just hope she doesn't grow up looking for me in uniforms or medals or flags. I hope she finds me in the sound of her breath before she takes a shot. Riley's eyes blurred as she reached the end. I didn't know he thought like that, she whispered. He thought like that every day, Mara said gently. He just didn't put it into words for the world. Mara reached across the table and touched Riley's hand. And now you carry it. Riley looked down at the journal, then out the window, where darkness had fully taken the yard. It was quiet, but not lonely. And in that quiet, something Jake had once feared, being forgotten, had been disproved. He wasn't gone. He was etched. In ink. In breath. In silence. Days slipped by, slow and steady, carrying with them the quiet gravity of something shifting beneath the surface. At Fort Braymore, whispers about Riley's impossible 1,200-yard shot were spreading, like ripples in a still pond. It wasn't just the feat, it was who had done it. A civilian teenager, wearing an oversized Navy jacket that once belonged to her father, an elite operator long gone. That jacket had become a symbol, and the story behind it was slowly weaving itself into the base's consciousness. Sergeant Clay Donovan was feeling the sting of those whispers the most. He had built his reputation on toughness, on knowing the right way to do things. Seeing a civilian kid, who wasn't even officially part of the military, outshoot his best marksman felt like a challenge to everything he stood for. His pride pricked, his ego bruised. So, one afternoon, as the sun began to lower and cast long golden beams through the barracks windows, Donovan requested a private meeting with Mara Kessler. The armory was quiet when Mara arrived, dust motes hanging in the slanted shafts of sunlight. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder and worn leather, familiar and oddly comforting. Donovan waited by a rack of rifles, arms crossed, a look on his face she hadn't seen before, a mix of discomfort and something almost like respect. "Ma'am," Donovan began, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I wanted to talk about your daughter." Mara folded her arms. "Steady. Go on." He shifted, then exhaled slowly. "I don't usually say this, but Riley's got a talent that's rare around here. What she did on the range, that shot at 1,200 yards, it's impressive. Beyond impressive." Mara watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. "I was hard on her. And on you," Donovan admitted. "Because I didn't see the story behind that jacket. I didn't know the weight it carried. The blood, the sacrifice, the history. I thought it was just a piece of old gear, but it's so much more." Mara's gaze softened, but she didn't speak immediately. "The jacket is more than just fabric," she said finally. "It's a symbol, responsibility, and love." Donovan nodded slowly, his eyes shifting to the rifles lining the walls. "She's got your steadiness, that's clear. But this base, it isn't always kind to those who don't fit the mold. Civilians, veterans who live quietly, they're overlooked, underestimated, sometimes dismissed." Mara met his gaze with quiet strength. "That's why she wears the jacket. To remind people that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's worn with humility." Donovan swallowed the last bit of his ego. "Maybe I've been too quick to judge. Maybe I need to listen, not just to orders or reports, but to stories. To people." Mara nodded. "And maybe it's time this base remembered that strength wears many faces. Not all of them loud. Not all of them easy to see." As Mara turned to leave, Donovan added softly, "If she ever wants to shoot competitively, really seriously, I'll make sure she gets the support she deserves." She paused, looking back. "Thank you, Sergeant." Outside, the sun slipped below the horizon, bathing the base in orange and purple. The day had started with laughter and disbelief, but was ending in quiet respect, the kind that doesn't need words, only presence. Farther down the range, Riley practiced her breathing, calm, precise, readying herself for the next shot only she could take. The morning unfolded like a slow, deliberate breath. Outside the window, the sky was a blanket of soft gray, filtering sunlight into gentle, muted tones that softened the edges of everything it touched. Inside the small house, the world felt quieter, not empty, but full of unspoken things lingering between Mara and Riley. Riley sat by her bedroom window, the oversized navy jacket folded neatly on a chair beside her. It had become more than just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol, a presence, quiet and steady, of a father she never truly knew but was learning to understand through the weight it carried. She traced her fingers over the worn fabric, feeling the coarse threads that told stories of distant deserts, long nights, and sacrifices etched deep beneath the surface. Mara entered the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee, the rich aroma filling the space with warmth. She handed one to Riley without a word and settled on the edge of the bed beside her, careful not to break the silence that had already stretched comfortably between them. "Last night," Mara began softly, "Sergeant Donovan asked me if you'd consider joining the base's marksmanship program. Competitive shooting. Something more serious than just practice on the range." Riley took a slow sip, her gaze distant. "I'm not sure I want to be a competitor, Mom," she said quietly. "I don't want to prove anything to anyone else. Not right now." Mara nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind those words. "That makes sense. But sometimes, showing up for yourself, even if no one else sees it, can inspire others in ways you don't expect." Riley's eyes flicked toward the window. Outside, the trees stirred in the morning breeze, their leaves rustling softly like whispered secrets. "I think Dad would have wanted me to shoot," Riley said, voice steady but edged with something deeper. "Not for medals or recognition, but to carry on something quiet, something strong, something that wasn't about noise." Mara looked at her daughter with a tenderness born of years of knowing, unspoken grief, and unyielding strength. "You're stronger than you think," she said simply. "Your father showed me that every day, and you're showing it now, too." The silence between them held a powerful kind of understanding, a connection forged through sacrifice, loss, and love. Later that afternoon, they drove out to the valley behind the ridge. This place was their sanctuary, free from judgment, expectation, or the echoes of other people's voices. It was just the two of them, the whisper of the wind, and the steady rhythm of breath and heartbeat. Riley unpacked her rifle carefully, her movements practiced and reverent. Mara stood nearby, watching quietly, ready to support but never to overshadow. Riley set a smaller target near the tree line, roughly 700 yards away. The wind shifted in unpredictable patterns, weaving through the trees and brushing against the grass. She took her position, settling into the familiar prone stance. Her breath slowed, each inhale and exhale measured and deliberate. This moment wasn't about proving herself to anyone else. It was about honoring her father's memory, claiming her own space, and forging a promise to the mother who had given everything to raise her. The rifle cracked sharply through the valley, the sound carrying across the open fields. The target shivered, a perfect hit. Mara allowed herself the smallest smile, one filled with pride and quiet relief. When Riley looked up, their eyes met, a shared understanding passing between them. In that glance was the echo of past sacrifices and the hope for future strength. A quiet strength, born in shadow, carried forward into light. Weeks passed with quiet persistence. Life at Fort Braymore settled back into its familiar rhythm. The hum of drills, the clatter of boots on pavement, the murmur of whispered stories shared in the mess hall. But beneath the surface, something had shifted, like a slow-moving current beneath still waters. The story of Riley's remarkable 1,200-yard shot, paired with the weighty symbolism of the jacket she wore, had begun to weave itself into the fabric of the base's unspoken conversations. It was a story not shouted from the rooftops, but quietly recognized by those who knew the true cost of sacrifice. The silent battles fought long after the last shot is fired. Mara noticed the difference most keenly in her daughter. Riley moved through her days with a new kind of confidence, one that was steady and grounded, neither brash nor boastful. It was a strength born of grief and love intertwined, an invisible armor crafted by memories and quiet resolve. Yet Mara also saw the heavy burden Riley carried beneath that calm exterior. A burden Mara understood all too well. One late afternoon, as the lights softened through the kitchen window, Mara found Riley seated at the table surrounded by old photographs, letters, and worn keepsakes. Her fingers traced the faded edges of a black and white photo. Jake, younger, eyes sharp and proud, flanked by his SEAL teammates. The photo was creased and delicate, as if the years of handling had etched the memories deeper into the paper. Mara settled beside her without a word, letting the silence speak. After a moment, she asked gently, "Thinking about him?" Riley's voice was low, threaded with quiet pain. "I feel like I'm carrying a war no one else can see. A battle that never ends." Mara's gaze softened with deep understanding. "That war doesn't stop when the uniform comes off. It follows you, in silence, in dreams, in moments when no one else knows the fight you're still waging inside." Tears welled in Riley's eyes, but she held them back fiercely. "Sometimes, I think I'm fighting it alone." Mara reached out and took her daughter's hand, her touch firm and steady. "You're not alone. You carry all of us with you. The ones who fought before you. The ones who stand beside you now." A long silence settled between them, the only sound the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. Then Riley looked up, her eyes shining with a quiet fire. "I want to tell our story. Not just mine or Dad's, but all of us. The ones who fight in silence. The ones who don't get medals or parades or recognition." Mara smiled, pride mingling with love and a hint of bittersweetness. "Then tell it your way, with truth, with honor, with the strength you carry in your bones." That night, Mara stood by the window watching stars flicker like distant embers. Her mind traced the memory of Jake's steady hands, his silent courage, and the weight of the legacy now resting on Riley's shoulders. The unseen war remained, but now it was met with presence, with voice, with dignity, and sometimes that made all the difference. The morning light spilled softly through the blinds, casting long, thin shadows across the living room floor. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall. Riley sat cross-legged on the rug, her gaze fixed on the small wooden box resting on the coffee table before her. Inside that box were pieces of a past she was only beginning to understand. A bronze star, dog tags tarnished by time, faded patches from deployments, and a folded photograph of Jake with his team. Each object told a story, but more importantly, each carried a weight far beyond their size. Mara watched from the doorway, her arms crossed, but her eyes gentle. "I didn't know he kept all this," she said quietly. Riley picked up the bronze star, turning it over slowly between her fingers. The metal was cold and worn, the edges smooth from years of handling. "He never talked about these," she said, her voice soft. "Said metals couldn't measure what really mattered." "Did you ever ask him why?" Mara's voice was barely above a whisper, as if afraid to break the delicate silence. Riley smiled faintly, memories surfacing like distant echoes. "I did. Once. He said the hardest battles were the ones inside, the ones nobody sees. And those, no metal or ribbon could ever fix." Mara nodded, recalling the nights when Jake's silence had been the loudest language of all. The battles fought behind closed doors, the scars no one noticed, the weight they all carried silently. Riley carefully laid the metal back into the box, then looked up, her eyes steady. "That's why I hesitated about joining the marksmanship program. I don't want to be measured by medals or scores or competitions." "But you're already showing your strength," Mara replied gently. "By carrying his story, by honoring him." Outside, a breeze stirred the trees, sending leaves fluttering against the window pane. The room seemed to hold its breath, filled with a peace earned through struggle and sacrifice. Later that day, Riley found herself at the base range, standing opposite Sergeant Donovan. The tension that once hung heavy between them had softened, replaced by a cautious, mutual respect. Donovan handed her a sleek, custom-tuned rifle, one with her name etched delicately into the barrel. "This is yours now," Donovan said, his voice steady but sincere. No strings attached. Riley accepted the rifle carefully, the cool metal solid and familiar in her hands. "Thank you, Sergeant," she replied quietly. Donovan nodded, a rare softness in his eyes. "You've earned this. Not just because of that incredible shot you made, but for everything you carry with you. Your history, your strength, your silence." Riley moved into position, settling into the prone stance she had practiced so many times before. The world around her narrowed, the soft rustling of leaves, the distant hum of activity on the base, the steady rhythm of her breath, and the gentle pulse beneath her fingers. She took aim. The shot cracked through the air, clean, true, unwavering. A quiet victory. No crowds cheered. No cameras recorded. No medals pinned to chests. Just the sound of a daughter honoring her father's legacy, and a veteran reclaiming her dignity. As autumn deepened over Fort Braymore, the days grew shorter and cooler. The leaves on the towering oaks lining the base's worn pathways turned vibrant shades of amber and rust before drifting silently to the ground. The crisp air carried the faint scent of earth and fallen leaves, mingled with the distant murmur of activity on the base. Footsteps, the low drone of engines, soft conversations. Mara and Riley walked side by side toward the base chapel. The small building stood quietly among the trees, its weathered wooden exterior glowing warmly in the fading afternoon light. It was modest, unassuming, a sanctuary not just for prayer but for remembrance, reflection, and honor. They entered in silence. Inside, the cool stillness wrapped around them like a gentle embrace. The scent of polished wood mingled with faint traces of candle wax and worn fabric. Light filtered softly through stained glass windows, casting muted patterns across the polished floor. They weren't there for formal prayers or ceremony. Instead, they came to honor a promise, one made long ago in quiet moments, buried beneath years of service, sacrifice, and the echoes of loss. Mara reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a letter Riley had written weeks before. The handwriting was neat but raw, words carefully chosen yet filled with emotion. It was addressed to her father. Riley took the letter gently in her hands. "I wasn't sure I could say these things out loud," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Mara smiled softly, touched by the courage it took. "Sometimes the hardest words find their way best when written first," she said quietly. Together, they approached the chapel's memory box, a small wooden chest tucked in a corner. It was filled with mementos, photographs, letters, and tokens left by those who had served and sacrificed. They placed the letter inside with care, closing the lid slowly, as if sealing a shared legacy. As they stood in quiet reflection, a small group of veterans entered the chapel, their footsteps light and respectful. Among them was Sergeant Donovan. When his eyes met Mara and Riley's, he offered a sincere nod of acknowledgement, a gesture loaded with unspoken respect and humility. Donovan approached them, voice low and earnest. "I wanted to say, I was wrong to doubt you," he began, glancing briefly at Riley before looking back at Mara. "Not just about her skill, but about what real strength looks like." Mara held his gaze steadily. "It takes courage to admit that," she replied simply. He nodded solemnly. "And even more to learn from it." Riley added softly, "I don't seek recognition or praise. I do this because it's who I am. It's who my family is." The chapel filled with a quiet understanding, a bridge built not on loud declarations or empty words, but on respect, presence, and truth shared among those who had known hardship and perseverance. Outside, the wind stirred the trees once more, sending a cascade of golden leaves drifting through the air. The past was never forgotten, but its weight no longer crushed their shoulders. Instead, it lifted them, carrying them forward, carrying their legacy. A legacy reclaimed, a family honored, a quiet victory finally recognized. The evening air hung cool and crisp, touched by the faint scent of pine and the promise of rain lingering in the distance. Mara stepped onto the back porch of their modest home, the wooden boards creaking softly beneath her worn boots. She wrapped her father's old navy jacket tighter around her, the fabric threadbare, but still carrying the weight of 1,000 memories. The fading light cast long, slow shadows across the yard, stretching thin like echoes of battles fought and lost, battles no one outside truly understood. Inside, Riley was alone in her room, surrounded by the quiet hum of the house settling into night. She sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully unpacking a small wooden box filled with keepsakes. Among the faded photographs, old letters, and dog tags lay a combat scarf, threadbare and frayed, once worn by Jake on deployments far from home. She lifted the scarf gently, letting it slip through her fingers like a fragile thread connecting past and present. Memories stirred, silent moments when her father's strength was shown not in words, but in the calm steadiness behind his eyes. The man she had never fully known yet who lived deep within her, in every breath, every heartbeat. A soft knock on the door pulled Riley back from the past. She looked up to see Sergeant Donovan standing hesitantly in the doorway. The usual sternness was softened by something new, respect, perhaps, or understanding. "I wanted to say thanks," he began quietly, his voice low and sincere, "for showing me what real strength looks like, for reminding me that respect isn't just given. It's earned by those who carry their scars in silence." Riley nodded, meeting his gaze with steady eyes. "Strength isn't always loud," she said. "Sometimes it's the quiet shadows, the ones that hold the most power." Donovan stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. "You've earned more than respect here," he continued, voice steady. "You've earned a place." For a long moment, they stood there, two warriors from different worlds, connected by the invisible threads of shared battles, both seen and unseen. Neither needed to speak more. The silence was filled with understanding. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves in swirling patterns around the porch. The shadows lengthened but did not darken. The past, with all its pain and sacrifice, was still there, not a chain but a foundation. Together, they walked forward, stronger and quieter than before. Unbreakable. Mara watched from the porch as the last light faded beyond the horizon, the stars beginning to flicker softly above. She knew the journey wasn't over. The shadows would always follow. But now, they walked in step with strength, honor, and the unshakable bond of family. The dawn broke gently over Fort Braymore, casting soft, pale gold hues across the quiet grounds. The early morning was calm, almost reverent. The distant hum of soldiers' footsteps, the low murmur of awakening voices blending with birdsong, and the rustling of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. It was a new day in every sense, but for Mara and Riley, it held a deeper meaning. This dawn was not just a beginning but a culmination, a moment where past sacrifice met present honor. Riley stood at the edge of the shooting range, her posture steady and sure, the familiar weight of her rifle resting comfortably in her arms. The oversized navy jacket, faded, frayed, and heavy with history, hung over a chair nearby, its presence silent but powerful. She didn't need to wear it now. It was part of her, woven into her identity like the steady beat of her heart. Her eyes focused on the distant target, unwavering and precise, ready for the shot she had prepared for all her life, even before she understood it. Mara stood beside her, quiet and proud. She had walked this path before, the path marked by silent sacrifices, hidden wounds, and battles fought far from the eyes of the world. Watching Riley, she saw the same quiet strength, the same resilience carved from pain and love. It was a legacy she had hoped to pass on, a torch carried forward without fanfare or noise. As the first streaks of sunlight stretched across the base, the commander approached, flanked by a small group of soldiers and veterans whose faces bore the marks of hard-earned respect. In his hands, he carried a worn folder, official and significant, the symbol of an acknowledgement long overdue. Sergeant Kessler, the commander's voice was calm, respectful, and filled with a warmth that echoed across the gathered crowd. The base leadership has unanimously approved your acceptance into the competitive marksmanship team. Your skill, discipline, and character exemplify the very best of what we stand for. Riley nodded, a quiet smile touching her lips. Thank you, sir, she replied, steady and sincere. Mara stepped forward, her voice firm yet tender, carrying the weight of years of unspoken stories. This moment is not only a victory for Riley, she said, but a recognition for all veterans, those who serve quietly, who carry battles unseen by others, who embody strength through humility and perseverance. The soldiers and veterans around them nodded solemnly, the shared understanding uniting them in silent respect. Riley lifted her rifle, inhaling deeply, centering herself. The world around her melted away, the wind stilled, the chatter hushed, until all that remained was the target and the steady rhythm of her breath. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The shot rang out, crisp, clean, and unwavering. It echoed far beyond the range, a signal far louder than words, a legacy reclaimed, a daughter's honor restored, a veteran's dignity celebrated. As the sun rose higher, flooding the base in warm light, Mara and Riley stood side by side, shadows stretching behind them, a future unfolding before. The past would never be forgotten. But now, it was finally at peace. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive tactical stories.